In this lesson, we're going to talk about error handling and creating error boundaries in our route segments. Now, generally speaking, in React, if you were to create error boundaries, you should do so by creating these class components, like the one that you see here. And you cannot create functional components. It should still be a class component for the error boundary to work. And it should expose these functions like the get derived state from error and the component did catch to be able to catch the error that was thrown further down in the tree from any of its children. So therefore, you can wrap a component like this with this error boundary component, which provides a fallback UI. So in case this component down here throws an error, the fallback UI from this error boundary is going to be shown, and the error is going to be maintained or contained inside of this boundary, preventing your whole application to crash. This error boundary component can also provide a function to reset the state inside of the error boundary and refetch or try to re-render that component that actually thrown the error. So maybe this time it actually goes ahead and completes what encountered an error before, and then it shows the actual content of that component. Now, if you wanted to create error boundaries in Next.js inside the app router, fortunately, you don't have to create error boundaries or class components like this. Next.js makes it so easy, and all you need to do is to add an error.js file inside of any route segment. So you can have multiple error boundaries depending on different route segments. And all this is going to do, as you can see here, once you add this error.js file to any segment, is going to wrap that segment, as you can see down here, the page, with an error boundary, just like what we have seen from React. And the component that you're actually exporting from this error boundary is going to be the fallback UI set for this error boundary. So therefore, if any error is thrown inside of the page, or any nested layouts and pages inside of this segment is going to get caught by this error boundary. Again, it prevents the whole application from crashing. It isolates the error, as you can see on this image, to that specific segment. We're going to actually see this in action inside of our application. And everything else above that error boundary in your application remains interactive, so it actually works. So if you have layouts and pages, or layouts, not pages, really above this error boundary, they would stay interactive, and we're going to actually also see this in action. So let's now jump into the code and see this in action. Now we're going to continue where we left off in the previous lessons. As you remember, we created this company route group, which was nesting the about, contact, and the team page. We also had this shared layout, as you can see on the right hand side, this side navigation, so we can easily navigate between different pages that were all grouped into the company route group. Now we also added this loading UI, whereby if any of these components were doing any asynchronous tasks such as fetching data, we would just show a loading spinner, a loading skeleton before the content of that specific segment is ready. And once it was, we would just swapping the loading UI with the actual content. Let's actually now go ahead and create an error boundary for this specific route segment. So I'm going to create a new file here called error.jsx. And inside of it, I'm going to create a new component called error. And then all we're going to do for now is to say something went wrong. Now, one important thing to note is that these components should be a client component. So you should pass in the use client directive up top. And if we now refresh our application, we should see that same behavior as we've seen before. But now we have this error.jsx added to our route segment. Now let's actually go to our about page and make this component so it throws some errors, and we can see if we can catch it inside of our error boundary. So I'm going to create a new function called maybe get data, and this, what it's going to do is going to return a new promise, which is going to get the resolve and reject function. This is going to call the set timeout function. This is going to have a callback, and it's going to call that callback, let's say in 2 seconds. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a random parameter here by calling math.random. so that we are randomly rejecting or resolving this promise. Instead of just throwing the error from inside this about page, I want to randomly create errors so that we can actually also get the result of this page without any errors as well. So we're going to say if random is actually greater than 0.5, because math.random is going to give you a number between 0 and 1. So I'm going to check and see if it is more than half. I'm going to reject by saying failed to fetch or to get data. And then in other cases, I'm going to just resolve. So therefore, we're randomly rejecting or failing or throwing an error or resolving. Now, instead of waiting here, I just want to await this get data function we created inside of this about page. Now, let me just get rid of that and this React import. Now, going back to our application, as you can see here, there was an error thrown when this page refreshed. And as you can see, there is this one error showing down here. This is an overlay shown in development environment. In production, your users won't be able to see this. But what's interesting here is that now the content is showing something went wrong. This is actually coming from this error function or error file that we created here. So whatever you export from this component is going to be actually the fallback UI for your error boundary. As you can see, this is the fallback UI. So this is going to be shown here because an error happened over here. So let me just give this a class of maybe text red 400 and maybe text as small. So it's a nicer error over there, but you get the idea. Now, to show that our app is still interactive, even though we have encountered an error in this specific segment over here, if I actually go ahead and click on the theme, first of all, the layout above this error boundary still working. It still works. So I can go to the theme, to the contact. So my app is still functional. It didn't crash the app. It's just that that specific segment in the about page encountered an error. Now this time when I went to the error, it actually showed the error because remember this function, that fake function that I created here, it randomly half of the times rejects and half of the times it resolves. So it's just a random thing. This time when I refreshed or when I went back to the about page, it actually resolved and I now see the content of this about page. Now there's two things I want to mention about this component we exported from this error page. Now this component is receiving the error and actually also a reset function as we just saw in the documentation. So if inside of this component, you want to actually log this error to any service that you're using, you can use effect, and then maybe you can just run a function over here that, I don't know, maybe logs your error to your logging system. So you pass the error to it and you just run this effect anytime this error changes. So you can use that error that was passed to here to log that error there. In development, you can actually also pass in the message that's on this error so that you can see it inside of here. So instead of just saying something went wrong, let me just close this by. Instead of just saying something went wrong, you can just pass in and say, hey, just log the error.message. So there is a message property on there. And as you can see here, it says fail to get data. This is the same thing that I'm passing in from this promise, fail to get data. So it actually reads that same message instead of just hard coding something went wrong. But this is actually only in development. If you push this code to production, because this is the client side of your application, it's going to actually hide this message. Instead, in production, there's going to be a digest property on this error that you can just read. It's going to be a hash of your error that you can compare or cross-reference with your server logs. But on the development server, you can see actually these messages. Therefore, I'm just going to turn this back into just showing something went wrong. Now, the other thing I want to mention is this reset function. Now, this error boundary is supposed to add this functionality so you can recover that specific segment that's affected by the error without reloading the whole page. So let me show you what I mean. So if I add a button here that has this onClick method on it that calls this reset function that was passed to this error boundary by Next.js, it's supposed to refetch the data from the server and render this specific segment that was affected by the error without reloading the whole page. But unfortunately, there seems to be a bug with this reset function at the time of this recording, so it's not working the way it's supposed to. I've talked it to the Next.js team trying to get some clarity. And if I do get some updates from them, I'll go ahead and update this video. But for now, we're not going to use this reset function, but we can still use the error boundary because it is still going to isolate the error to that specific segment that has happened. It's going to prevent our app to actually crash. And also everything else above this error boundary, as you have already seen, is still interactive. And at the very least, the user can maybe change routes or refresh the page to reload that specific data and re-render that segment to get rid of that error. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that errors happening inside the layout of the same segment where you created your error boundary is not going to be caught by this error boundary. And the reason for that, going back to the diagram that I showed in the beginning, is that as you can see, this error boundary is wrapping our page, but it is nested inside of our layout. So it's unable to catch the errors that's happening outside of it. Any error that happens inside the children of this error boundary, including the page or any other page nested inside, is going to bubble up and be caught by this error boundary. But the errors outside of it, for example, in this layout, are not going to be caught with this error boundary that you have on the same segment. Now, to catch the errors inside of this layout, you have to create an error boundary in the parent. Now, the parent of this specific layout, because we're in this route segment, is going to be inside of the app. So for example, here you can create an error.jsx file. Inside of it, maybe we have something similar to catch the error. And here we just say that this is from the app. You can be as granular as you want with these error messages. But the point here is that any error happening in this layout is now going to bubble up to the parent and is going to get caught with this parent error boundary. And for the exact same reason, any error that happens inside of your root layout, so this is the outermost layout that I have directly inside of the app, any errors that happen here is not going to get caught with this error boundary we created at that same segment, because this is going to be actually nested inside of this layout. So to catch errors inside your root layout, you have to actually go ahead and create a global error.jsx. Now this is going to wrap the entire application, and the fallback you return from this global error is going to actually replace your root layout. So therefore, it actually has to have the HTML and body tag that was required inside of your root layout, because this global error fallback is going to actually replace your root layout right now. This is more like a catch-all error handling component you can include to handle errors that happen specifically inside of your root layout. That's a wrap for this lesson, folks. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about React Server components and client components, when to use which, and how to interleave them together. So see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.